Bioshock Infinite, on release, was heavily praised for its storytelling style and its signature, irrational twists. It was a Game of the Year candidate, something easy to see if you check its 94 score on Metacritic. Yet here in the year 2024, the game isn't seen in quite the same light. Like us all, time has taken its toll on Infinite. Over the years, the universal praise the game enjoyed on release has been slowly eroded. In its place stands both die-hard fans and staunch opponents. It seems to be a game you either love or hate. What I'd like to do is meet somewhere in the middle. As Booker DeWitt, you've been given a simple job. Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. The girl being referred to here is Elizabeth, a religious icon in the world of Columbia. She's being held in a tower deep in the city, and you must free her to clear your ledger. As the game starts, you get a chance to explore the world free of combat, and it's a real joy. The world of Columbia is fascinating, and there's a ton to see and experience in this opening bit. The environment is incredibly well crafted. Posters and statues help to convey the philosophy of the world, and you can overhear residents conversing as you walk along. You find your first audio log here, a Bioshock tradition, along with new short movies called kinetoscopes. These simple vignettes are usually only a few still frames with text and music, but they really add to the universe significantly. Hearing a barbershop quartet sing an old-timey rendition of the Beach Boys' God Only Knows is the cherry on top of this beautiful opening Sunday.
God only knows what I'd be without you, without you, without you.
Of course, it's not long before things take a turn for the worse. While you're walking through Columbia, you should get the sense that things are off, so to speak. This strange atmosphere culminates at the annual Columbia Fair Raffle. You win, and your prize is first throw of a baseball at an interracial couple. Racism as a central theme in Columbia seems to float in and out of the story almost at random. It feels like this was supposed to be a more front and center topic for the game to tackle, but it ends up being mostly background noise outside of a couple of overt sections like this one. It's a scene that serves its purpose as a shocking moment to kickstart the action, but does little else. Regardless, this is where you stop being a Colombian tourist and start to carve a bloody path towards your ultimate objective. Bioshock Infinite's combat is flat out boring. At first, it's interesting to experiment with the different weapons and vigors, but it really doesn't take long before you realize that the combat isn't going to evolve any further. Irrational seems to have gone out of its way to make Infinite play more like its FPS contemporaries in the worst possible way. On top of your health bar, you get a recharging shield. Instead of having a separate melee weapon, you have a dedicated melee button. Instead of a weapon wheel, you carry 2 weapons at a time and switch them with the push of a button. That last change is arguably the worst, because it's completely at odds with the game's upgrade system. It's baffling to me that you can spend money to buy weapon upgrades for guns that you might not see for hours at a time. For example, if you invest early on in upgrades for the revolver and sniper rifle, you might go pretty long stretches where you won't be able to utilize those upgrades because you'll never find a revolver or a sniper rifle. It truly feels like a game that was designed with a weapon wheel in mind, that was then playtested down to a 2-weapon system by people who don't understand what Bioshock is. I remember the skylines being shown off as a big system in previews, but in the final game they're really only used for short-range travel and to cheese encounters. Like the rest of the game's systems, the skylines are fun to experiment with for a few minutes before you realize how limited they are. The last piece of the combat infrastructure comes in the form of tears. Elizabeth mostly uses these tears to bring in some form of cover or ammo. Every once in a while you can pull in an AI ally or turret, but they tend to get destroyed before doing any real damage. The tears just scream to me of missed opportunity. They could have gotten a little more creative with the fact that Elizabeth is literally bringing in stuff from another world but it's almost always a boring wall or a barrel of guns. At best, it's an AI version of an enemy that's so much worse at killing enemies than it is at killing you that it almost feels like an insult. Exploration is a core staple of the Shock series, and it's here that Infinite fumbles the hardest. Most of the game is strictly linear, with a few side rooms or small buildings that you may find an audio log in, if you're lucky. Due to the two-gun system and the shields, you really have no incentive to explore much outside of collectibles that are almost always in pretty obvious places. You may run short on ammo for your favorite upgraded guns, but exploring the world rarely gives you more. Instead, you usually end up picking up whatever the enemies were using before you brutally murdered them. There isn't a crafting system, so there's no need to find crafting items. Instead, you just find money, and that's really it. Compounding this is the fact that almost everything worth anything is put behind a locked door that you have to use lockpicks on. There isn't a minigame to go along with this, it's just having the lockpicks and pushing a button and picking up your reward. Gone are the days of searching for codes in the environment, unlocking doors by hacking them, or finding key codes and audio logs. The environments themselves are beautiful, but the environmental storytelling is also a huge step down from previous entries. There are two fairly large areas in the game that serve as temporary hubs, but these locations are even worse than the linear environments. Finkton at least has the common courtesy to just bore the hell out of me, but Emporia is infuriating. It features one of the most annoying boss battles in all of gaming, and you have to fight it 3 times in a row. The fight is against the ghost of Elizabeth's mother, and it's a slog where you repeatedly kill the same enemies over and over and over, while chipping down the ghost and praying that Elizabeth will throw you some salts and ammo. Speaking of Elizabeth, after you rescue her from her tower early on, you begin your journey to try and escape Columbia. Your first big task involves getting weapons for the Vox Populi, one side of a roaring Columbian Civil War. Getting the guns turns out to be a big hassle, involving jumping through multiple dimensions and majorly screwing everything up. By the time you're done, an alternate dimension Booker has apparently become the hero of the revolution and died a martyr. It's fun finding posters praising Booker as the hero of the revolution and things like that. And you do get treated to a sweet a cappella version of Fortunate Son. The fun times don't last for long, though, because Daisy Fitzroy, the leader of the Vox Populi, decides at this exact moment that she should become an insane person. Despite acting like a normal human being the rest of the game, she takes a young child hostage, and Elizabeth decides that she has to get her hands dirty to save this kid. Elizabeth kills Daisy in a almost comically bloody scene that would be pretty melancholy if it wasn't preceded by Daisy doing a mustache-twirling heel turn. After all this, you come face to face with Songbird, a human-machine hybrid that serves as Elizabeth's bodyguard, prison warden, and surrogate father, all in one. He swoops in to take Elizabeth away, and after a short chase, you find yourself in front of Comstock House, the home of Columbia's great leader, Zachary Hale Comstock. He serves the role of primary antagonist, consistently attacking the player and Elizabeth in the hopes of taking her back from you. Inside Comstock House, you quickly realize that things are not as they should be. You find statues of Elizabeth, portrayed as the savior of Columbia, and you hear recordings of her speaking in the preaching style of Comstock. She talks of destroying the Sodom below Columbia, and how Columbia is another ark for another time, directly invoking previous speeches by Comstock. Then, in a twist that pretty much everybody saw coming, you find an older Elizabeth on the top floor. She's leading an attack on New York at the moment, fulfilling the prophecy Columbia was built on. She's regretful, and she gives you a note with some advice on how to stop Elizabeth from becoming like her before sending you back to the world you came from. Booker is able to rescue Elizabeth, but it's clear that her time in captivity has taken its toll. Elizabeth has become vengeful, and she wants Comstock dead. So the two of you have a good time as you cut through dozens of rubes on your way to Comstock's airship. This airship serves as the final level of Infinite, and I honestly hate it. You have to fight a ton of enemies on your way to the top of the airship, while you wait for the skyline to be cleared. It's a chore. When you finally reach Comstock, Booker swiftly kills him in a fit of rage while a horrified Elizabeth looks on. Before he dies, though, he lets on that Booker is not quite what he claims to be. To get answers about this, you need to destroy the tower you rescued Elizabeth from early on in the game. The tower serves to dampen Elizabeth's reality warping powers, and by destroying it, Elizabeth should be able to travel freely between worlds and essentially become a god. That sounds great, but before you can access the tower, you have to fight one final battle. A wave-based survival battle against the Vox Populi. It's not exactly a hard battle, on normal difficulty at least, but it's just too long and has no checkpoints. You have to protect your airship's drive core as you fly to the statue, and it is constantly attacked and gets destroyed extremely easily. So there's a good chance you'll have to play this section more than once, and every attempt taking 15 minutes makes it kind of a nightmare. So shout out to anybody who beat this game on 1999 mode. You're a god. Finally, you command the Songbird to destroy the tower using the handy note future Elizabeth gave you, and you end up being transported to Rapture. This reveal is awesome. I mean, when I hit this moment way back in 2013, I genuinely lost my mind. Of course, this time around, I knew what to expect, but I was still elated to be able to explore this little chunk of Rapture once again. The problem is, this is where the game starts to fall apart in a narrative sense. The Infinite in the title comes full circle as Elizabeth explains that there is always a man, always a city, and always a lighthouse. There are millions of worlds telling millions of stories, just like the one you played through. Booker and Comstock are in fact the same person. One from worlds where Booker got baptized and became Comstock, and the other being the Booker we know and love. Both Elizabeth and Booker agree that Comstock should not be allowed to live in any world, and to achieve this, Booker must die before his baptism can take place. So you watch as Elizabeth drowns you, echoing the false baptism you received earlier from the preacher when you first entered Columbia.
Booker DeWitt, are you ready to be born again?
Why are we back here?
This isn't the same place, Booker.
Of course it is. I remember.
Are you ready to leave behind all
You're
that
not-
has gone before? Wipe
You're
the
not-
slate clean.
Who are you?
You chose to walk away, but in other oceans, you didn't. You took the baptism. You were born again as a different man.
Comstock.
It all has to end. To have never started, not just in this world, but in all of ours.
Smother him in the crab.
Smother, 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 smother. Before the choice is made, before you are reborn.
What name shall you take, my son?
He's Zachary Comstock. He's Booker DeWitt.
No. They're both.
The ending at the time left a lot to interpretation, but here in the future, we don't have to wait too long for clarity because we have DLC to talk about. Clash in the Clouds is the first piece of DLC made for Infinite, and it sucks. It's a series of combat challenges set across 4 arenas themed after areas from the main game. You play 15 rounds in a row to finish a level, and you collect money to buy upgrades by looting enemies and completing specific challenges on each level. Now, the challenges are an absolute nightmare, not just because of them being challenges, but also because if you miss one in a later round, you have to play through all the previous rounds again from the beginning to get another shot at it. I was so tired of the combat by the end of Infinite that the very thought of having to play 60 plus challenge rounds made me want to die. Still, I soldiered on and played the minimum amount of rounds to capture footage for this video because I needed it to make the video complete. I also soldiered on because there is one redeemable aspect to this DLC. You can spend the same money that you use on weapon upgrades to unlock a bunch of concept art, music, and work-in-progress kinetoscopes that are unlocked in a sort of virtual Bioshock Infinite museum. A lot of this stuff is fascinating, but having to play the combat challenges to unlock it all is just plain cruel. I'd highly suggest just looking up the museum on YouTube after this video if you're interested, because it does have some really interesting things in it. Burial at Sea is the second and final piece of DLC for Infinite, but it comes in two distinct parts. Part 1 has you once again taking the reins of Booker DeWitt, though this time around he's a hard-boiled Rapture detective. And, once again, Irrational has nailed the opening. Just like the main game, there's a fairly significant portion of this opening that's just spent wandering around with no combat, experiencing the world. It's awesome seeing Rapture in full swing before its fall, and it adds to the lore of the Bioshock universe significantly. A prominent feature in this section is Sander Cohen, the crazy artist you meet and potentially kill in the first Bioshock. You'll find kinetoscopes of his art littered around Rapture, and they're so bad that they're honestly amazing.
Silence!
An encounter with him kicks off the gameplay of Episode 1, and it is fundamentally the same as the main game, but with a few key changes that make it much more enjoyable. For one, the weapon wheel is back, and with it comes the introduction of resource management to the world of Infinite. You really have to make every bullet count here, and using your plasmid strategically is key. Enemies generally only drop a handful of bullets upon death, sometimes none at all. This redesigned system goes hand in hand with a return to the more traditional Bioshock level structure. Instead of being funneled around corridors, you once again run around in large environments full of hidden secrets and nooks and crannies. The story of Episode 1 follows Booker and Elizabeth as they hunt down a missing little sister named Sally. Upon finding the girl, Elizabeth turns on Booker, who is revealed instead to be Comstock once again. It seems our sweet Elizabeth has been spending her time since the end of the main game hunting down any versions of Comstock that might have survived, and this Booker is the last one. A Big Daddy then appears and skewers the final Comstock before the credits roll. Outside of the ending, not much really goes on here to advance the main plot, but that is quickly rectified in Episode 2. Episode 2 picks up right where 1 left off, with Elizabeth waking up after Booker's death, only to see Frank Fontaine, the big bad from Bioshock 1. Fontaine and Elizabeth make a deal to save Sally's life, and you as the player finally get to inhabit Elizabeth as you hunt down a means for Fontaine and his army to escape the building you've become trapped in. The gameplay of Episode 2 is a complete shift from the main game, or even Episode 1. Elizabeth isn't a hardened veteran like Booker, and so you have to play stealthily to survive. Being seen is basically a death sentence even on normal difficulty. Luckily, the game gives you plenty of tools to fight from the shadows. A brand new crossbow comes with 2 different bolts, a sedative and a gas bomb. You get a revolver and a shotgun as well, but you'll likely never bother to even use them. The biggest help comes in the form of a new plasmid called Peeping Tom, which allows Elizabeth to see through walls and turn invisible while standing still. It feels kind of overpowered, but it's a lot of fun sneaking around and knocking people in the back of the head with a skyhook. As you wander around the world, you pick up a ton of lore connected to both the original Bioshock and Infinite. The sheer amount of information you can find by looking around the environments is staggering, and it greatly helps filling in the gaps the main game left behind. In fact, by the end of this DLC, you'll have answers to almost every question you could have about the world of Bioshock. You can tell Irrational really put their whole heart into this last piece of DLC. I mean, you can hear Elizabeth sing a full song on a random radio in a room that you never need to even go into, and that's the only place you'll hear it played in the entire DLC.
You're tuned to Radio Raffle. Music for the discerning ear.
Okay.
And now,
Wanna hear my latest
we've got
number?
something very
Coming up
special
next.
coming up next.
Knock your socks off, I tell you.
This little lady, who goes by the name of Miss Elizabeth, was picked out of the thousands by the maestro himself, Sander Cohen. And when Sander finds a songbird, you know for sure she's gonna sing sweet. So here's Miss Elizabeth.
This is it.
You belong to me.
Hey, that's not it. Nepotism. Payola. That's what this is. Who do they know? Whose pillow they fluffing?
Harassment. That's what this is. Incessant, unbounded prying into my respectable entrepreneurial affairs.
The song itself is referenced in the game by posters of Elizabeth around Rapture, calling her Cohen's Songbird. There are a bunch of little easy-to-miss details like this that really set this DLC apart from the main game. You end up having to go back to Columbia to solve your Rapture problems, and this revisit is chock full of lore on Fink, the Vox Populi, and the connections between Big Daddies and Songbird. Your ultimate goal is to retrieve a Lutece particle, which will allow you to send the sunken building you're trapped in back towards the surface, close enough for Fontaine and his army to launch an attack on Rapture proper. You succeed, but the only reward you get is betrayal, as Fontaine tortures you in one of the most uncomfortable first-person sequences I've ever experienced.
I can't be held responsible for what comes next. Here we go. You feel that? I'm moving the pick across your eyeball, still now, and resting it on your skull. There's about a bit over 1/4 inch of bone between the pick and your prefrontal lobe. And that's where this little fella comes in.
I don't.
It was just a wee tap. But I don't expect it'll take more than a few of those to reach the meat. And then we might find you a bit less the mule.
You have one last task to accomplish before you can save Sally's life. Find the ace in the hole. This ace in the hole turns out to be the protagonist of Bioshock 1. Elizabeth needs to give this information to Fontaine for the first Bioshock to even happen. Or perhaps she already has given him the information. While I do have some reservations about Elizabeth's story only serving to set up the first game, I think this twist serves nicely to wrap up the series as a whole. Burial at Sea is a much more compelling experience than the main game, but without the context of Infinite proper, it just won't make much sense. Thus, Infinite itself serves almost as a barrier to its more compelling DLC content. The Bioshock franchise is one of the most beloved in gaming, but a lot of that love stems from a strong debut title. Before Infinite released, many expected it would be a Bioshock title only in name, and in many ways they were correct. The game doesn't play anything like its predecessors, and often it feels like a chore, but the narrative as a whole is worth pushing through for. Its first DLC isn't worth the $5 it costs, but the remaining two surpass the main game in pretty much every regard. Infinite is the weakest game in the Bioshock trilogy by a good sight, but it's still a game I'd recommend for most, at least with Burial at Sea tacked on. Thanks for watching. The end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that format. It's slightly different from the World at War video I made earlier, in that one had kind of a different thesis statement, and this is a more general retrospective, but I wanted to cover the whole of Bioshock Infinite because it's very interesting to me how it turned out, as a huge fan of Bioshock, which is a game I'd love to cover in the future. And just like Infinite has a million videos, but hopefully you took something away from this one. And if you did, like and comment and subscribe and all that good stuff if you want to, because it does help. And hopefully you'll see more videos like this in the future, again, depending on how this one does. I was surprised that the World at War one did as well as it did, to be honest. 1,000 views may not seem like much, but it's a lot to someone like me for a video, you know, about a game that is coming from somebody who normally makes food videos and has 1.5 thousand subscribers, so basically none. So I was impressed with that. I was happy with that. So here we go, Bioshock. And I have other ideas that I want to do too, so, you know, hopefully this video does okay and we'll do those. But in the meantime, I'm going to be spending all my time playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and yeah, so if you're trying to contact me, I'm probably playing that game, and that's going to be March for me, so don't know when the next video is going to be. It's not going to be on Rebirth or anything. I got some backlog ideas to do, probably a shorter one than this one, because 25 minutes was quite long for me. Even Bioshock Infinite itself, replaying it took quite a while with the DLC, like 25 hours doing combat challenges and things like that. So, yeah, shorter one probably, maybe something a little more obscure. I have an idea to try and highlight a game that's more obscure, but of course that probably won't work out too well considering I'm obscure, so it's going to be a video seen by nobody, but we'll see how that works out. So see you next time, enjoy, and play Bioshock.